Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Good morning, welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. I get to meet a lot of different ministers, and right now I'm in the process of trying to reconnect with folks who have, and with congregations who have had transitions. And one of those transitions often leads to interim ministry. And one of the folks that I'm talking with, the person I'm talking with today, is an interim minister. He's going to help us understand a little bit about his role as interim minister, as well as, just get to know who he is and how and where he came from and his experiences in life. So Joe Hein is my guest today. He's the Reverend Joe Hein. He is the current interim minister at Northminster Presbyterian Church, but you have a long history with the area and very colorful things, so I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about today. So introduce yourself. Who is Joe Hein, and what makes you tick?
Thank you, Joe. I'm a Binghamton native and have served a couple of parishes in this area in the past, but a long history here. Binghamton North High School, Broome Community College, and then off to North Carolina for a baseball scholarship. But my roots are long and deep in this area, both as an ordained minister as well as a native of this area.
So baseball, huh?
I can barely remember it, but yes, full scholarship to a school in North Carolina, to Campbell University, to play Division I baseball.
And what position?
I was a catcher. You
were a catcher, really?
Yeah.
I played catcher, but I was a Division III player. It's a great position. You handle the ball a lot, kind of almost like the quarterback for the offense or the defense. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true, and I have the knots on my body to show it, as I'm sure you do. The knees and the feet and the hands.
Yeah, those take the most beating too. Yeah, and that must have been interesting to be a student athlete, that kind of thing.
It was a challenge, and I was serious about my education, but I had a commitment to baseball, which I loved with my whole heart as well, and hoped to play professionally, but God had other plans for me.
Oh, and what were those plans?
Well, I played for Campbell University, which was a Southern Baptist affiliated school, and at the time I wasn't a person that went to church, and but being in that culture, having to attend mandatory religion classes, just awakened my faith. And I had a radical conversion experience my senior year in college, surrounded by players, Southern Baptist kids that were being trained to be ministers. I had a conversion experience, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life.
And how would you describe the conversion experience? I mean, it must have been, what's the story in that?
Well, I wasn't drafted.
Okay.
I had hoped for the phone to ring on the day of the draft, and I sat by the phone, a pay phone, in the hall area of my dormitory, and I waited for 15, 16 hours, and as it got later in the day, my hopes began to fade. I was scouted by both the Cardinals and the Mets, so I had some reason to believe there might be a call. Had met the scouts for those teams. They said, "We're watching you," etc. So I realized by the end of the day that the call wasn't coming. So the very next day, I went out to our athletic field, and it was a beautiful, beautiful athletic field, half-a-mile track with an expanse of grass in between, and I sat down with a pencil and paper and notebook. And I was going to try and decide what I was going to do with my life. And as we talked earlier, Joe, I was a political science major, and I thought maybe my path would lead to Washington. But in that moment, it was an absolutely beautiful spring North Carolina day. The sun was shining gently on my long shoulder-length hair at that time, a beautiful soft breeze. And in that moment, I felt this overwhelming sense of God surrounding me. And I realized that I was part of, not standing above, but I was part of everything around me. I was part of the grass. I was part of the wind. I was part of the air. And I just had this overwhelming sense that God was the creator of all of this, and that he had made all of this in love. And that included me. And essentially, the message that I received is, don't worry about what you're going to do with your future. You know, your future's with me. And I got up from that field with an incredible sense of peace, and I went back to my dormitory, and my roommate had a Bible, which I had never opened. I had never read the Bible, but I wanted to know this God, and I opened the Bible and began to read it, and that 3 years later I was in seminary.
So that's an interesting story. So you weren't raised in a religious household, or were you, or how did that?
I'd say it was moderately religious.
Okay.
My mother made me go to church, essentially, like a lot of kids approaching their teen years. Mm-hmm. And then she couldn't get me to go to church, when I matured a little bit. And so church wasn't really part of my life. And my mother went every Sunday, and but she couldn't get me to come, so she let me be and figure things out for myself.
So were you? So this is Southern Baptist School, and what were you raised in? Were you raised as a Baptist, or was this?
No, I was initially raised as an Episcopal.
As an Episcopal?
Right. And when I finished college, I went to my Episcopal priest here in town, the priest at Christ Episcopal Church, who became a friend of mine, and I told him I've had this incredible conversion experience, and I believe in God. I love God. I want to go to seminary. And his response was, listen, you're not Moses. You just don't go up on a mountain and come down with tablets and go to seminary. You have to serve the church for a while. Oh. And I was in a hurry. I was young. I was impulsive. And I said, no, I can't wait. I have to go. Right. And so I did. I went unaffiliated to Andover Newton Theological School in Boston.
Oh, right.
It was the beginning of my journey. And I was turned off with the Episcopal Church because of the priest's response and the way that he responded. And so I began to worship actually in a Lutheran congregation, which would be my path forward for a number of years, the next 16 years.
So you were a Lutheran pastor then at that point, or?
I was. I transferred from Andover Newton Theological School in Boston, and then went to the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Gettysburg, PA, essentially because I wouldn't have been able to get a parish unless I went to a Lutheran school. I was informed. So I took a year off and transferred and went to the seminary in Gettysburg.
So you went to so you became a Lutheran, which we those of us who are clergy understand a little bit about the relationship between Lutheranism and Episcopal stuff, and it makes perfect sense in a way. I mean, they've had long-standing ecumenical relationships between the Lutherans and the Episcopals going back decades now. But how does one move from being a Lutheran pastor to being a Presbyterian?
That was a bit of a challenge. So, and part of that challenge is that you have to pass 5 ordination exams.
Right.
And having not gone to a Presbyterian seminary that prepared me for those exams. I had to study extra hard. But I was a good student, and I was able to pass those exams, but it was a totally torturous experience, as I shared with you earlier, especially in that I had to retake Hebrew, which I passed with an A, but I had to retake that as well as Hebrew, which was a more challenging religion for me, and had to be able to translate scriptures into that language, from that language.
Yeah, those are interesting. It's been a long time. I don't know that I could pass a proficiency exam in Hebrew at the moment. I might be able to do a little bit better with Greek because I did a Greek, kind of like a Greek minor through college, and then had to pass the proficiency exam in seminary, and then the rest of that kind of stuff kind of followed there. But it seems to me as if, like, what I hear when I'm listening to your story, it seems that we have like two parts of the church that you're trying to kind of work with. One is the God and the spiritual part of it, and then the institution itself, and trying to marry the two things together sometimes is a little bit difficult. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think I would approach it first in talking about the liturgical side. It was a natural evolution, actually, from the Episcopal Church to the Lutheran Church, because I joined in the Lutheran Church, I was Augustana Synod, which is the highest liturgical tradition in the Lutheran Church. And then my internship in Washington, D.C. was at the highest, it had the most formal liturgy in the United States. So I was ideally suited for that. It was Augustana Synod as well. And so liturgically, and that was the most difficult transition to the Presbyterian Church for me, in that the Presbyterian Church has more of a free-flowing liturgy. It's not an ordered liturgy in the way that both the Episcopal Church and the High Lutheran churches. So that was a difficult transition. And then, of course, there was the tests. But Luther and Calvin were contemporaries.
Right.
Lutheran Church and Presbyterian Church, they were contemporaries. They argued with each other. And theologically, really not a huge difference.
Right.
Some significant differences, especially in view of the Eucharist. But beyond that, pretty much we're saved by grace through faith. The Protestant standard.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean that was comfortable, but yes, it was a transition.
So you did an internship in Washington, but you were also, weren't you active in community organizing then at that point too?
I was trained in Washington, D.C. as a community organizer. Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Yeah.
I went to a one-month class, I went to a one-month class where I was trained, and I worked in housing issues in the Meridian Hill area in Washington, D.C., essentially an El Salvadoran community, blighted projects, terrible situation. And I was fully invested in that, as well as being fully invested in my job as a vicar at Augustana Lutheran Church in Washington.
And so those were two things that you were doing at the same time. Did they complement each other?
Well, my senior pastor was very supportive that I was doing that work, and it was two full-time jobs. So I was working hard, but I was tremendous sense of satisfaction in the work I was doing, until ultimately the work of community organizing became coercive, trying to coerce landlords to make repairs in these large buildings. And of course, I had great, sympathy for the people living in those buildings.
Right.
I was on their side, and they needed advocates, so I organized them. But the part of it where we drove to landlords' homes, for instance, in Bethesda, Maryland, I would bring
Right.
a bus of 30 people, a couple of vans, make noise in front of their house, terrify the wives and children of the landlords who never expected to be greeted in that way. Many of the things that I learned as a community organizer just were not compatible with my Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
I felt it was too coercive. The means didn't justify the ends to me, and I had to leave that kind of work.
My guest today is Joe Hein. He is the interim minister at Northminster Presbyterian Church in Endwell, and we've been talking about his background and how he became an interim minister at the Presbyterian Church. So you also that at some point you became like a Presbyterian minister and you started serving Presbyterian churches. What's the story there?
Well, I started serving in the Presbyterian Church in 2004. After 5 years out of ministry, a couple of years at Ithaca College, get my master's in communication. And just, as I said, I left there was a transition between the Lutheran and Presbyterian Church. In that time, I went to school, but realized that the work of government and politics is an entirely different thing than what I thought it was.
Right.
So I returned to my roots, and Conklin Presbyterian Church opened their arms to me. They took me in, and I worked as Reverend Steve Starzer's assistant to the minister for 3 years while I studied to pass my exams in the Presbyterian Church. The congregation was warm and wonderful. I studied, the confessions of the Presbyterian Church. And when I passed my exams, I was called to Ross Memorial Presbyterian Church on Mitchell Avenue in Binghamton.
Right.
I served there for 2 years, and then I received a call to Middletown, New Jersey, where I served for 15 years at Westminster Presbyterian Church, and had a fabulous, very satisfying, wonderful ministry. And I retired in 2021.
And so now leap forward, 3 years, and you're being called back into a pastoral role as interim minister at Northminster. What drew you to the congregation?
Well, I was open to interviewing with them, and they were I interviewed with the session, the governing board of the church, and they were just very honest in what they were looking for, very eager to call an installed pastor, and they offered me the position, and I spent a year walking around the house with my hands in my pocket in retirement. You can only play so much golf and fish so much. So
golfing and fishing are important to you then?
Golfing and fishing are important to me, but that's just the point.
You just don't want
it's far from enough.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I lacked that sense of purpose, and certainly Northminster has given that to me now. It's a very full-time job, and it's going great. The people, it's a very organized church, excellent leadership. A very busy church, and I've been there 3 months, and I'm enjoying it very much.
I know Sam Lupo, who is one of the deacons at the church.
Yes.
And I know that you've been doing some work with trying to get folks down or get supplies down to North Carolina. Do you want to talk a little bit about that too?
Sure. Thank you for asking. Yeah, just as an example of the excellent leadership at Northminster Presbyterian Church, in a period of 10 days, we were able to establish a contact with people in North Carolina with the Baptist Church in, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the, Burnsville, North Carolina, which is a half an hour north of Asheville, which was the dead center hit in in the mountains of North Carolina. In a period of 10 days, we were able to fill a 24-foot truck provided by Sam Lupo and Sons with an item list of things that the people there needed. And it was so organized. I mean, various leaders took important roles. Everybody was eager to get it done, and in a period of 10 days, we had filled that truck to the top, and it was on its way to Burnsville. And Sam and a coworker drove it down there and actually delivered the items, various things, leaf blowers, chainsaws, heaters, knowing that winter was coming, so we supplied kind of high-ticket items. Over $20,000. The community responded beautifully. The congregation responded beautifully, and we were able to fill that truck, and very satisfying.
And did you work with other organizations to do that, or was it just the church itself that became like the epicenter for that?
The church was the distribution point, but having been involved in hurricane, of course I lived in New Jersey for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I was there when Hurricane Sandy hit.
Right.
About 13 years ago now. So, amazing connection between Broome County and my church in New Jersey is that Steve Starzer and Reverend Robert Peake sent all the leftover hurricane items from your two floods.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They emptied the warehouse, filled up a tractor trailer, and sent it to Middletown, New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy. I had organized 75 congregational members to receive that truck. We unloaded those goods, and then we began delivering help to our neighborhood, actually before those goods arrived. But the morning after Hurricane Sandy hit, we were in the neighborhoods.
So this was in 2011?
Yeah, 11 or 12.
11 or 12.
Your memory's better than mine, Joe.
So 2011 is when we had, it's interesting because I probably was part of that. I'm the chair of COAD, or I was at the time actually on the community organization active in disaster, and I was part of the organizing crew that was helping with a lot of that stuff. And so all the materials that came from here and the rest of that probably came from our warehouse, because I was working with Robert, and I was working with the work that they were doing over at his church. They had a couple of semis there. We were supplying them with water, with food, with a bunch of other materials from Chow, and so some of the stuff that you were getting, like the shockwave, the various implements of destruction that kind of go along with all flood recovery, probably came from our warehouse. So it's very interesting to me that that's kind of the story and how it connected, because the council's been active in flood recovery and flood stuff here, both in 2006, 2011, and then helping with some of the recovery effort after Hurricane Sandy came through. So, yeah, it's interesting how our paths have crossed.
It is indeed.
And so, how do you find the interim ministry in general? Like, do you like it, or how does it meet with your personality? Or,
well, I mean, it's essentially I'm doing ministry, and that's how I approach it. It's full-time ministry, and which is a joy again. But my job and how I understand it essentially is to, first of all, provide some stability. I preach weekly, I teach, I do all the functions of a minister of word and sacrament, visiting the hospitals, counsel, etc. So I'm enjoying that part of it, and that's part of my job description as an interim minister. But just my own thinking about it is beyond simply keeping the train on the tracks And it's to encourage the congregation, the committees and the congregation to continue doing their work. The congregation, of course, isn't whole without the teaching elder, one to teach and preach, administer the sacraments. They're not whole, they're missing that element, but the rest of the organization is in place, and my job is to continue to encourage them to continue to do, to fulfill their mission as Christians. Beyond that, however, is I don't think even an installed pastor makes a congregation whole. As Presbyterian Christians, we say the head of the church, we confess that the head of the church is Jesus Christ.
Right.
So I see part of my job as an interim minister is to help the congregation understand that and to widen their spiritual awareness to Christ's power working through committees and ultimately through their installed pastor. The leader is Jesus Christ. The secondary leader, maybe this is the shepherd, the
Right.
teaching elder. But in the Presbyterian Church, the session is also the governing elders, and there is important in the way that we think of ministry in ordination as the teaching elder is the governing elder.
I've often heard the saying that the pastors shouldn't make themselves so large that people can't see Jesus, and I think that that's part of the problem at times at church is that we get so focused on the minister or on any number of other things inside of a congregation and forget that really, our leader and our theology is being given to us by Christ.
That's exactly right. The inverse is true as well. When committees assume too much authority and perhaps they get used to doing the mission and ministry of Jesus Christ in the same way year in and year out, that they become stagnant. Then it becomes kind of institutional survival. So the light needs to shine on all the leadership of the church, on the entire ministry of the church.
My guest today has been Joe Hein. We've been talking about his entire story, how he got to Northminster Presbyterian and his current role as interim minister at Northminster Presbyterian. Thank you for being on Encounter today.
My pleasure.
And for all of you, I hope that you would be kind and gentle with each other. Have a great Sunday.
Merry Christmas.